Yeah, I've been. This was the first week of my studies at school.
Oh,
I'm okay. I'm studying like a linguistics bachelor now at Leiden University, and yeah, it's. I mean, there's so much I have to say about this, and like we live in a postmodern paradigm, like that's for sure. We do live in it, or at least the university qua institution lives in it, because I'm not so sure that the populist right lives in a postmodern paradigm. But on the other hand, I think we can also make an argument that they also live in a postmodern paradigm. And I will give a very concrete example right now. So, you guys have probably heard about the murders taking place as of recent. And wow, that's living in a vicious time. I believe it's going to be get more vicious. So, anyway, so here in the Netherlands, there has been this feminist campaign and it's called "We Take Back the Night." And it's women who are afraid to walk because they're looked at, they're being scoffed at, they're being, have all these interactions with men and stuff like this that they don't want. So they're like, yeah, we want to take, but we want to take our stand. And so it didn't take long for the populist right in the Netherlands to make make a campaign that is called "We're gonna take back our country." And so they use exactly the same font, the same color, the same rhetoric. And so I think this is perfection, actually, theoretical perfection, because here we can see that the logical conclusion of the postmodern woke paradigm is the populist right. It's like, okay, you are doing feminist identity politics, you're doing black identity politics. We're just gonna do white ethno-nationalist identity politics. And so they do play that game. And I was watching a conversation that Daniel Todd had with Kettle last, which was immaculate. And one of the points I love that Cadell was making is that we really basically can't overestimate the extent to which both the left and the right do not cognize and remember their history, right? So, for example, yeah, the postmodern woke paradigm is a kind of after effect of 1968, um, right? So, yeah, but I mean, like, so I will bring it back to myself because now I'm studying linguistics in university, and okay, so there's two types of linguistics. There's pre-modern linguistics and then or like let's say modern linguistics and then postmodern linguistics too. That's another one we can add. But so pre-modern linguistics, think about Islamic scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. Think about Leibniz. Think about even Aristotle. There's many thinkers here. But then modern linguistics is something that really starts with Ferdinand de Saussure and his general course in linguistics. And so here we have a type of structuralist paradigm. And when you read Leibniz on language and words and Leibnizian linguistics, you'll basically think that there's some inherent logical hierarchical order of language which is grounded in God. And so words are what they are. Whereas in structuralism, the basically relativity explodes, which means that there's a time of there is yeah contingent phonemes which enter into relationship with each other, and out of that comes meaning, right? So we have like yes and no, and like through these differential relations, whole systems of language emerges. So I think I'm not seeing it people say it in this explicit way, but I really think it's like this. I'm very much convinced that structuralism is basically when you apply Hegel to language, because language ceases to be a substantial thing, but it works with like intrinsic and inherent negativity, out of which you get this yeah play of dialectics and speculation grounded in substance as subject, right? So substance would be like the enunciated, and subject would be the place from which you speak. Because if now I'm proclaiming information to you guys, but it's not neutral, impersonal information, it's me who is saying that to you. So obviously there's a certain message I want to get across in some sense, right? So um, yeah, but so the linguistics I'm studying at university right now, that's not Saussurean linguistics. I would say it's they just call it linguistics, but I would say there's structural linguistics of Saussure, and then there's cognitive linguistics, and that's basically what I'm getting into. And cognitive linguistics has been influenced very much by British like pragmatism, empiricism, as well as French, yeah, just French postmodernism, like the general French fry taste. And so there is merit to these paradigms. I'm learning a lot, and I'm really loving that I'm learning so much about language. But I'm a lot of times asking the question like what is language and what is linguistics? Because I just assume that I don't know what these things are, and I feel like that returning to the same basic questions, there's a huge value to that, and I feel like the scientific paradigm as such, as basically Alenka Zupancic has said, it's very good at getting you towards the moon, Newtonian physics is, but to do this, it has repressed a fundamental, let's say, dimensions of subjectivity. And and so there we can also see how science can run rampant or like can basically become absurd, right? Like take Elon Musk as an absurd way of scientism. It's like there for Elon Musk, there's an inherent value in going to Mars. I have no like it's always as soon as you would ask him, okay, why? Then he comes with this like rationalist mysticism of how beautiful it is to spread consciousness around the universe. It's pure religion. Right? But he would never say such a thing. He would say, no, it's like scientific, blah, de blah. And so I do think that the argument I want to make is that I think linguistics, like, I think cognitive linguistics has a problem which psychoanalysis tries to work with, namely the truth of the subject and its inherent primal repression, which science needs, but also what about the fundamental questions of the final cause and purpose and the good life and like theopolitics, like God, like so. With that, I'll yeah. Thanks for letting me share.
Absolutely magnificent, and congratulations on the program and the study. And Mr. Jockin, Javier, Daniel, it is wonderful to see you. And I think the things you talked about relate. You did mention the violence that has occurred. We also see, I believe, Indonesia is falling apart. Nepal, all around the world, we are seeing very severe activities. I believe it was Derrida who suggested that the way that language is used suggests the politics, that language and politics are actually very strongly connected, and that if you have a language that, say, believes in a transcendental signifier, then you're more prone to centralization and totalization. And it is not by chance that I think much of postmodernity is interested in questions of language, because this was seen as, well, if language operates by a transcendental signifier or some sort of absolute logic, then we are habituated by the very speech act to be subjects of whom are susceptible to being controlled and oppressed by some quote unquote big other, that these things actually go together. Now, when I was doing Korobowski, and because he's big, but I actually will just tie it to what you were saying, that there's something about structuralism that's actually Hegelian without knowing it's Hegelian. Basically, what I would want to say is that we are now in an age where people are indeed using language. And actually, I will also note, belonging again ends up quite obsessed with language use in the formation of the subject to open new political possibilities. And we look at Hofstadter, we look at analogical reasoning, which I struggle to say. We look like Kripke, et cetera, so forth. A lot of what I think we can say, not to use postmodernity as a boogeyman, there is something about postmodernity that is a Hegelian logic without commitment to the other. And the entire Hegelian logic requires a certain commitment to becoming other. If you do that, what you end up with is basically, well, the political extremism we're seeing and the breaking up of the world into small fascist states, which will only continue to accelerate. And I definitely think if one wants to discuss the Kirk incident, this is not good. And I am not trying to be dramatic because most people will say, oh, well, lots of people die. What's the big deal? Well, the issue is with Kirk, he is seen, you'll notice that most of the people in the media are very spooked. A lot of the people on the podcast are very spooked. This is very important because they control the information flow. And if they are spooked and they start reporting, we got to crack down to save their own lives, well, then we can see things getting bad. There's always that question of why the killing of the Archduke started World War I. You would never have guessed this. Well, one reason perhaps is that the Archduke is a political person, and once political people feel like that they can be target, then all of the things that had already been brewing for a very long time come to the surface. And we know that there are major, major, major socioeconomic problems, and it will indeed be probably some event that in a different context would not have led to a black swan chaos outcome. But in this particular context, an event like that can indeed trigger a lot of things. And even if Kirk does not trigger some sort of larger, some terrible thing, the increase of the probability of such things occurring in revenge means that the likelihood of an event occurring that sets off the domino is higher. And then we can also get into other things. But the idea is that what we also are seeing is if you are in a kind of paradigm, and I'll give it to Javier and Jockin, where you're actually using a philosophy that leads to a certain breaking up, a certain even, you have to think the subject. I completely agree. I 100% agree that language has to think the subject. I think everything has to think the subject. But here's the issue. If you have a philosophy that thinks the subject, but an inability for the subject to identify with the other, that's small fascist states. You're in a massive, massive problem. And so also what ends up happening in postmodernity, the others that people identify are the ones like them. The only way to avoid that is to identify with the other, well, ultimately that you hate, right? That would be the ultimate other. Well, how in the world do you do that? Would that not be immoral? Look at the response, and I don't mean to go on, but I think that what is occurring now is actually showing that we are trapped in autonomous rationality because the true real is always the ethical real. Because there are many people that are saying, well, you see all the scripts, right? And I don't mean that in a belittling way, but political violence is never acceptable. We shouldn't do those things. But if you have extreme views and you're saying all of these things, so you have these sort of scripts. You can't just outright say it's okay, but you have scripts that you follow. Well, following those scripts, how do you not? Indeed, Mr. Luber, good to see you, sir. According to your very logic, are you so sure that you may verbally say there's no place for political violence, but in your logic, how does it not end up there? How does it not at least sort of say, well, I mean, if they're Joseph Goebbels, I mean, wouldn't you kill Joseph Goebbels, right? And I'm not saying that Kirk was Goebbels, but there's many people who feel that way. And so how can you say to them? Because if you were in history and I said to you, hey, this guy is Joseph Goebbels, and he needs to be stopped. And if you do it, there are lots of people who are going to have talks about how political violence is never right, and you will be seen as a monster. But what kind of human being are you if you're unwilling to be seen as a monster to stop Joseph Goebbels? You see how there's always a logic? This is what we've been getting at. There's always an internally consistent system that will arise to justify any and everything. And basically, the problem of internally consistent systems has been unleashed upon the world, and we have no way to stop it. And ultimately, it will come down to the ethical real situations like this that come down to the ability to face the other of whom we hate and think is a monster. Because they think we're a monster. And basically, like I've been saying more and more, I more and more think of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil as the dynamic between good and evil. And basically, it's ethics. The knowledge of good and evil is ethics. And ethics all brings a logic that we're all trapped in now. And hell is empty, the demons are all here. So I'm thinking about that, and I do think the way that language is used is also actually a focus on the subject of whom then must have the responsibility to handle and deal with otherness that their very ethics says it's monstrous to do. And maybe they are Joseph Goebbels. Maybe they are monsters. Maybe they are evil. What do we do? The knowledge of good and evil, we can't bear it. But anyway, Mr. Rivera, Thomas Jockin.
Man, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about language lately, and also in relation to Kirk's situation. Um, what's interesting about psychoanalysis and the use of language is like what's actually striking my interest is this distinction between obsessive and hysteria. And Dimitri said something about cognitive language. It excludes the subject, right? It's so funny because that almost describes what the obsessive discourse does. The obsessive generally only wants the object, excludes the subject. The process of treating the obsessive is to kind of hystericize the obsessive. What's the hysteric? The hysteric is always aware of the other. The hysteric wants to complete the other. So in some sense, the discourse movement is to go from obsessive and hystericize the obsessive. That's where the anxiety lies, because now the obsessive has to realize, oh shit, there's an other. There's an other. Ironically, I feel like a lot of the discourse around politics, some of it, is obsessive. I think a lot of science in particular is obsessive. Because one of the feature traits of obsessive is it likes to think in being. That's interesting. The obsessive discourse likes to think in being. Why? Because it wants to shut down the other. It's interesting that the obsessive from there can't think the subject because it doesn't want to do anything with the other. So I've been thinking a lot about that recently. I also recently watched the Roses movie with my girlfriend, and again with language. That phrase people say with relationships, like, "Oh, it's the little things that destroy relationships. It's the little things that that you have to look out for." And I was telling my girlfriend about this. I said, but why do people still call it little things? That's what's interesting to me. Like, I was like, we understand that it's not little, but we still call it little. Why? Right? And in some sense, it's useful to understand, like, okay, look out for the little things because those are significant. But at the same time, the use of language is really important here because what that colloquial phrase is perpetuating when we say it's the little things that matter, it's the little things that will destroy a relationship. What are we perpetuating in this logic? Well, for most people, they think, okay, just be aware of the little things, they have significance. But what we're really saying is think first, then affect. That's what we're still perpetuating in that colloquial expression. Think first, then affect. Really, it's the affect that then determines how significant the thing is. Right? That's what's so fascinating about that phrase. Oh, it's the little things that will destroy a relationship. It's like, but isn't that perpetual misordering, as useful as it is to kind of garner awareness, it's somehow there's something repressive about that phrase that we want to continue to not change that orientation. We just say, oh yeah, little things matter. But yet people still struggle with expressing the little things. And again, it's just like, I'm like, but I always have to say to myself, why are we calling it little? We keep saying it's big, but we're like, oh, it's little, but it has importance. Like, so I think the Roses movie is a great example of the theme of little things will destroy a relationship, right? But you can tell, I feel like the ordering matters in this case, because the moment that we still perpetuate this idea that little things matter, we're still not reorienting to the fact that it's not the little things, it's the fact that the affect itself determines the significance, right? Big little, it's how you use, right? I mean, that's such an erotic pun, but like it's true. Like we're like in terms of the language use, that's true. It's how we're using it. But yeah, so you know, I'm fascinated, and again, to go back to the uses of language again, Kirk. I've been fascinated about the Kirk discourse because Kirk is now a signifier, right? Now that he's dead, he's a signifier. And what does Kirk mean for people? Well, we're discovering what it means, right? For some people, Kirk means evil, radical right extremism. So his death means, oh, that's good. An evil man deserves to die. That's and I saw a video and I was intrigued by the woman saying, oh, I'm so happy he's dead because why would I mourn for an evil man? Right? She connected the other signifier, evil. He's an evil man. But notice the right's use of language. Oh, he had a family. So Kirk connected to family. Kirk connected to he was a husband, right? We should mourn these things, right? So now the significations, the signifiers are channeling and constraining the pathos. Notice how the like this was my whole thing about it's the logos that cuts off and constrains the pathos. Because the moment you say Kirk, evil man, pathos is violent. Pathos has nowhere else to be but violent. You're constraining the pathos. But if you say Kirk, family man, dead, oh, that's really sad. Right? It changes like almost immediately. Right? And this is the discrepancy that we're seeing, that it's the logos that is paralyzing the pathos in some way. Right? The pathos, you're channeling the pathos into such a strict direction that it can either experience grief or it experience violence or kind of perverse jubilation, right? Oh my God, he's dead. Great. One more, one less, right? That's how people are reacting. One less. So I'm really fascinated by the discourse of Kirk is now a signifier for pathos expression, essentially. And then what are the words that they're connecting to Kirk, which already dictates the direction of the pathos, right? It's funny because now you see people using negations, right? They go, oh, I disagree with him, but it's horrible that he died. Now, from a Freudian point of view, the negation first, and then the proposal is always interesting because it's like, why do you have to negate? And there's an anxiety about this from the left. There's an anxiety, well, not even from the left. It's just an anxiety of anybody that disagreed with him. Of just like, I can't fully mourn this death because people think I might agree with him. That's problematic. That's problematic. But you see it in the negations. People saying, it's horrible. But I just want to say, I disagreed with him. Right? That's so fascinating that people are prefacing that because nobody's asking for the preface. But everybody's anxious that you might actually think that we're on the same side. It's really telling. But I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. And I extremely appreciate the analysis of the discourse because I think that is the revelation. That's often the revelation. That is the truth. The discourse is the truth because it unveils the logic underneath an operation that you can only glimpse, right? And I'll give it to Mr. Jockin and then Mr. Luber. I think So there's a few things. First, what you said about now that Kirk is dead, he can be the signifier. Absolutely. So to use my language, now that he's dead, he can be a signifier as such is a kind of girdle point. It is this thing that is absent. Now an internally consistent system is possible. And everyone is creating their internally consistent system and they are operating within it. And that is manifest in the scripts of the language. And that's another term for the map is indestructible. So there are certain scripts that people have to follow that are the way they are because it's how you get the approval of the invisible other, the other people, while not alienating your tribe, but also not wanting to see yourself as a monster, because you have those tensions going on, right? Like if I say it's horrible what happened to Kirk, and I know that my tribe is liberal, then I might get excommunicated because no one wants to appear heretical. This was something we talked about at the Rosy Cross. And so you're scared to death to be seen as part of the other side. So you need to make sure to include a little line that says, I disagreed with him, but it's horrible, because that's an acceptable line in the discourse where you won't be seen as a heretic, because everyone is basically doing everything in their power to avoid being seen as a heretic by their side. So basically, when people have this tension between what happens online is if I say nothing about Kirk, that could be seen bad. But if I say something about Kirk, then I might get kicked out by my tribe. So let me find the line that I've seen in the past people have used that has the highest probability of giving me a pass, where I can both get a pass by my community, but also get a pass from people who are like, how can you not say something against this, right? The problem is these are all band-aids for the ultimate problem of the ethical real, which is ultimately abyssal, and that if we can't face, we're screwed. Because to throw out something very large, because this is the ethical real. This is the void, because now everyone is locked in their internally consistent system, and that is a world on the brink of apocalypse. And in a sense, these great ethical real, and I'm playing on the ethical real, these great breaks, they are a revelation of the void, like the whirlpool, this auto-cannibalistic force that is under everybody's logic that we're all trying to avoid with our internally consistent systems, that nevertheless makes that void inevitable. And so you're trapped. Your A is A. You need AB. Well, the only way is AB is to identify with the other. Guess who the other is for the liberal? The Kirk supporter. Oh, well, guess what? You do that, you lose your tribe. And I don't want to lose my tribe, and I don't want to risk everything I built, my church, my community. Why do so many churches get destroyed? Because eventually something arises where the community says that person was unethical and the pastor needs to punish them. And the pastor says, well, if I kick them out, that's not what Jesus would do. But then if I keep them, all these other people are going to leave. Churches are always, and I think, just from my experience in church, but I'm going to go on a limb and say it's the same for every religion, is that in communal organization, somebody does something that is seen as unethical. The leaders have to make a decision. If they choose the organization over the people, then this automatically sets them up to, well, not become other, not identify with otherness, and now they're on the road of entrapment. But if they identify with the other, everyone might leave the organization because they think it's enabling the evil, right? And this is to make a very bold claim, this is the ultimate political problem. This is the American Civil War. This is everything that we have not thought. We have still not thought it because it's too terrifying, and it is too difficult. I love also, I'll stop because there's too much to say, but what you were saying about the little things I very much like. I like to say the invisible things are what matter, because I like the irony. It's the things that become invisible to you that matter. Like the Heidegger doorknob, because it works. Yeah, that's the problem. Why do people destroy marriages? Because they're doing that which gets them through the day. And it just turns out as they're doing that which gets them through the day, stuff becomes invisible that you really hope doesn't become invisible. And that's why everyone feels hurt in those situations. Because I was just doing my best. I didn't even see it. Nobody told me. Well, you should have known. Why did you need me to tell? Well, that proves right there that you're a bad person, that you didn't even see it. Game over. The void has opened. The whirlpool is there. Ethics is unleashed upon the world. And so it's not good. The other reason why relationships are damnation, or have this focus, is because relationships are the best of things. And there's this idea in religion that if you have a single sin and you bring it into the best of things, it becomes hell. Because what the best of things does is it brings out the sin, magnifies it till you're forced to face it. Joy actually grows sin. This is the thing that is very difficult to understand. that like, let's put it this way, the presence of God turns you into a demon, actually, if you don't accept God, if you don't accept him, right? Because then all of everything within you blows up in hatred of that thing, right? So that's why, there's this idea in some traditions that hell is God for those who hate him. And basically what ends up happening is that's isomorphic in relationships with this, because how do divorces happen? This was the person you were going to give your life to, for goodness sakes. This is the person that at one point of your life you would have died just for a glance of out of the window, and you get to the point where you can't even stand them. It's because it's isomorphic of the God-human relation, where this, in being joy, if there is some sort of dynamic of the human being that is sinful or not addressed, it destroys the whole thing and turns it into hell. And so that also can happen on a geopolitical, political stage. I will pause and give it to Mr. Jockin, Mr. Luber, and then Dimitri. Mr. Jockin, it is wonderful to see you, sir.
I'm just glad I could finally join the calls. I've been shadow banned by my email client the last 3 weeks, where the email notifications have been getting to my spam box. I had to ask both Javier and my girlfriend to both ping me to make sure that I remember the damn meeting was today. Now that's evil inbox. That's correct. I think actually I'll start there because, we ran out of time, me and Javier, over the summer, but a book we were going to read was from Bauernmeister, Evil, Inside Human Violence and Cruelty. It's a sociology study. The big kind of cliff note about it is sociological studies of acts of violence and murder and human cruelty. And the observation of the author, the researchers, was that this interesting pattern that the action was of nothing. It was of nothing for the perpetrator. In both in terms of their rhetoric discussion about it, as well as just actually how they, if you want to treat that as what they thought was actually their perception of it, it was of nothing. But then for the victim, it was everything, which points to and that's interesting that was the conclusion of the researchers. Like that's the big takeaway, is that the quality of evil is when we see this disjunctioned subjectivity of the event, of the encounter. That's I think a very important property that stands out in my mind. I say this because I think this Kirkland episode is a great example of this, because I think I say this because I think a lot I've seen in some circles that I'm around, there's been the discourse has been, besides what has been talked about, a big one, a whataboutism move of where were you talking about Palestine? I find that very interesting because, see, that's a populational event, right? As opposed to an individual. It's almost, I think, part of it. But I know why they're doing it. It's because of the operation of the symbolic, right? It's an operation of the symbolic and the attack on the symbolic. It's almost, we can call it the political essence, the essence of the political body, right? Of this political body, that there's a strike to that symbolic order, right? That is now, here's my opening statement. I wrote in the comment to Dimitri. I think that note about the postmodernist kind of inflection point of 1968, totally agree. I completely agree. Because I think this is important. That's why history matters. There was absolute panic of the race riots, actually, and here's the thing. There's been arguments made that the Civil Rights Act was a new America. That was a different America because of the creation of the protected class status and the intervention of the federal government into the states in a way that was never the case before. That I bring this up because of all the assassinations, the political, symbolic assassinations occurring. And in the race riots, there was all these explosions of violence and great significant anxiety. This was it. That the political order was going to fall apart, and that's it. We're getting collapsed, but it didn't happen. But why? So that's what I'm curious. I don't know what. I don't have an answer, but it caught my attention because this moment right now it's always a problem. Is this a 1968 race riot blip that there's an inflect? There's the on my topic of health. I'm teaching that course now. There's sometimes some injuries to the body are not that critical, but then there are other ones that absolutely they're that are critical masses. If this strike happens, the body gets destroyed, right? It gets immediately destroyed. A runaway reaction, a tipping point, critical mass. The question is, we don't know which one it is. We don't know. And this is like kind of off the hip response. I kind of felt this way with the Trump assassination attempt. Now, obviously, part of it was because it didn't succeed, right? But another note about it, I think a big no. What kind of actually know what my terror was? The sense it was a washing away of memory. Like this event occurred and memory just washed away. I almost have a feeling that's the like, besides it was anxieties, because I agree with you, Daniel, the idea that the political class has been attacked. So thus the self-interest of those in that group will obviously have an anxiety and use their platform to create a narrative. I've seen it already happen. I've seen some people on the right say, that's it. Every Antifa, every political group of their enemies has to be watched. We got to shut them down. You can't allow, like, they've just been disqualified from the political order. I've seen that happen. I think in other stances, everyone's hoping and praying that basically the AI, a washing of destruction of memory is going to occur, that we're just going to forget. And I don't know which one is worse. I don't know which one is worse. That we're going to just hope that a washing of memory is going to hold us up, that basically no one can coherently keep their political order correct, that it can be organized and coordinated and explode. I kind of have an instinct that was the conclusion of 1960, like 1968. Why did it not explode? Because growth of markets occurred and we were just able to satisfy our needs. And then we just forgot. And I remember the whole narrative, the Black Lives Matter, like this whole rhetoric of racism was on our argument was, yeah, it was bad. That's why civil rights. This is why we have this. And, we're going to just do these protections and the promise of materialist capitalism will be fulfilled. That regardless of your race, forget about liberty, forget about the democratic principles or anything from the Constitution. If you can just get material success and comfort, you get your house, economic prosperity, all that, then it's all good. It's the Singapore method. You can be in a totalitarian state, but as long as you get your needs met, who cares? And then the tension was we got to the 2010s, right? Around that time period, 2010s, basically Obama. That movement, it's almost you're going to get the argument, the logic of the civil rights movement was to get to Obama. And by Obama becoming president, we have our messianic symbolic image that would resolve all racism. The new heaven on earth would occur. But then when we realized, oh, wait a minute, we didn't get the political utopia for everybody, then we have now as acceleration in that vector again. That's my argument. Anyways, you can challenge me on these points. These are just off the hips. But on this larger, this is part. I find this current episode, again, why I'm terrified I'm terrified in so many angles, because I'm terrified of the AI wash of memory. I'm terrified of basically explosions of violence. And that leads to this point of this is the vectors of good. Basically, this idea of truth, goodness, and beauty. I find this event, what's occurring right now, is one of the case examples of why there's a distinction. And if we cannot think the beautiful, we're screwed. Because it's in goodness, it's actually right to destroy evil. It is right. If you're stuck in a logic of goodness and you try to use truth, there's a threat. There's basically inside joke for those who know. Basically, we were witnessing a discourse that there was a disagreement about Israel and basically what's going on in Israel and Gaza, and the argument was made around sanity check. Clearly, we all agree, we're all reasonable people, right? That this is happening. And they try to use truth to justify it by definitions and statistics and all that. No, there were other parties that absolutely disagreed because their operations of goodness were totally different. And it completely fell apart. And I think a big note is the idea there is no forgiveness. There is no forgiveness because it's rationally justified. It is rationally justified to destroy your enemies. Injustice. Vengeance is justified rationally. It is only in beauty, forgiveness, that this is possible. But do you know how hard this is? This is, as you guys have saying, this requires seeing the other. And, I think even the rhetoric of I got to be honest with you, I think a lot of statements have been made of this is about empathy. I mean, because the problem is, you know what it is? It's like, it is true. Like Kirk was a father, right? Kirk was a father. That's very true. But it's also like that category technically apply in all cases. But as was discussed before, language is rhetoric. The choice of what terms you use and in what relationships absolutely draws out certain realities of being emphasized versus others. And actually, the pain is not seeing the other as a possible, like these other things were always possible, but people chose not, you can't see them that way because they're this category instead. This is why Aristotle says you can't, like, it's interesting too, because remember, it's actually, Aristotle noticed that you can't hate individuals. You can only hate classes of people, murderers, rapists, things like that. And that's what's, and when I hear Javier is making his comments about this, when it's about discourse language and drawing out a certain image with that, I see that exactly in alignment of that. Because no, for a certain population of people, Kirk was not a father, he was a right-wing pundit. And by the way, personal note, my other circle, so I have my really conservative liberal circle that are going, but what about the guy, he supported Israel? Nope, absolutely not. He gets no sympathy because of that. But then I see the other side to go, oh, he was a moderate. He's the moderate. He was a moderate conservative. So actually, that's another area of terror. You know what happens when the moderate gets killed? Explosion and velocity of extremes. This happened in the French Revolution. People seem to forgot their history on this detail. You don't kill the moderates because the moderates stabilize the extremes. So this is again why the symbolic order body. This is the question. We don't know what's going to happen here. We do not know what. Because it may not be, that's the thing that's also very important. It may not be that the explosion of violence occurs with Kirk. Like in response to this, something going to explode in violence immediately. No, what might happen is that the political ordering of the right in America might get more extreme. And then give it about a couple of years, it's going to explode. It's going to be way worse. I see Daniel emoting in extreme agreement right now. No, I think that covers it. So I want to thank everybody's time. Great discussion. I'm happy that again the email spam box did not prevent me from coming on this call.
Everything you said is absolutely right. And on that last point, this is why I think it is very significant that Kirk is in the media podcast, because now the media people are scared for themselves. And so even if this doesn't begin the domino effect, they're going to raise the ante on the discourse and start having the Overton window will shift for them, where the debates will be how much police force in the streets, not if or not, how much security for their own sake. They control the discourse, and if they are scared, they will absolutely, for their own sakes, raise the intensity of the discourse. Because here's the problem. To turn down the temperature of the discourse would necessarily risk their audience, because they would have to start saying that, they'd risk their audience for all the reasons we said earlier. If you don't do the script, you're going to be seen as a heretic and kicked out. The only direction the media can go in and not risk their argument is extremism. That's the only way they're going to be able to go. And so they will. And so even if this does not start the domino effect, start the violence, it is absolutely in my opinion, a very significant piece in the intensification, because Kirk was arguably, I think you could make a case that he was the most powerful media force for Trump. Because he did these conferences, he did more to get the young men to vote for Trump than anyone. And you know where those young men are going? Nick Ferrantes, they going over to the Christian nationalism. They're going to be there in a heartbeat because it's war. You see them all saying this. This is war. We have to stop it. Ladies and gentlemen, you got a bunch of young men who are thymos deprived, they have no meaning. They're told they're a waste. Well, I've been going to the gym while I was unemployed, and I will show to you what I am good at. You have a lot of people who, because they are not, say, smart or technically skilled, they don't have a place in society. But they might be quite strong. They might be good with weapons. They might be good with a whole lot of skills that society has not given them an opportunity to implement. Michael, good to see you. And now they're like, finally, I'll be able to do all of the things that I'm good at in a manner that is socially acceptable, and it's for the greater good. Remarkable. I will give it to Luber and Dimitri. I think what you said, 1968, I think, why didn't that blow up? I think there's a few reasons. I think it ultimately is because capitalism. We had an enemy, Russia, the Soviet Union. Also, the government, there's a weird way, honestly, in which having dysfunctional institutions help because you can blame them. So you had Nixon. I think after Nixon is Ford, Carter, Reagan. You had a bunch of really bad institutions. You had wars that were debacled. And so you could always plausibly deny that the problem requires violence. Maybe the next administration will make a difference, right? Maybe once we defeat the Soviet Union, once we get a better president, because it was so dysfunctional. In a weird way, dysfunction holds back violence because it gives plausible deniability to believe that it is necessary, right? If you are in an age, which I think we are in, where basically people believe no president will win, no president will make a difference. So it's not a dysfunctional institutions, it's that the institutions are in essence unworkable. You are effing screwed. And that's where people are now. They're not in the idea that the institutions are dysfunctional. They're believing they are fundamentally corrupt in a manner that is unredeemable. You could look at a book like Mr. Studebaker's book, which I think makes a very powerful argument that the way is shut, that literally the institutions cannot be reformed, that it requires a great leveling event, such as a world war, financial crisis, plague, etc., so forth. I think people now think that. I don't think they thought that in 1968. And that, I think, is a key difference. And then, of course, 1968, well, led to Francis Fukuyama, the end of history, capitalism. And basically, capitalism has been holding back all of these dysfunctions, and now it's lost its legitimacy. The real crisis is that capitalism lost its legitimacy, because that was the lid on Pandora's box. That was the third that unified people, and you could say it exploited people, except, yeah. All lids on Pandora's box have a dark past. And then once that becomes visible, you have issues, because you better have a new third. Is it going to be AI? Is it going to be white nationalism? That's a third. Fascism is the way you escape logic. And what I mean by that, fascism gives you a way to enter a non-rational variable into your thinking to escape the unstoppable force of autonomous rationality. So that's why people are going that way, because it's like, well, let's just do something. Like, if you're trapped in this rationality heading you toward the AI apocalypse or these endless wars between good and evil, etc., so forth, you need something non-rational, that of which is not reducible to a rational calculus. Whiteness, America, that is not rational. That is what people, or some body practice. So you need a new third. And the only one to get out of the vectors of the good, which must clash, because the vectors of the good are internally consistent systems. Internally consistent systems, maps, are vectors of the good. And I really appreciate how you put that. So if you're operating according to a map, you are doomed. Maps are possible because of a girdle point. The difference is using the map to find the girdle point and dwell in it versus use the girdle point to make your map indestructible. We live in a world where people are using the girdle point to make their map indestructible. Therefore, the fighting goods are indestructible. And when goods that are indestructible fight, there's only one loser, the Earth. That has to be destroyed. So we're in a dire situation. But let me give it to Mr. Luber and Dimitri. Mr. Luber, it is good to see you on this fine day, sir.
Likewise, yesterday was so tragic. I like couldn't eat, honestly. I'm not a Charlie Kirk, guy per se. But here's my thing with it. It's like I think he has good and bad takes. Like I don't to attribute someone as good or bad as a whole is the real problem. It's you attribute goodness in particular instances, but not as a whole. That's the key. Like like I'm Jewish. Like I should do that with Hitler. You feel me? Like I should take a good look at history and see how everybody does good and bad things, and that as a whole, saying good or bad is problematic. I think Daniel, you really brought that to my attention with like the Civil War and like the debates that were going on with the senators. Like some of the people on the Confederate side made good points. You gotta realize that. Like that's just there's good instances of good arguments and points. So I don't think it has anything to do with like the whole of saying, oh, if you're Confederate, you're good or bad. And like even saying that is a problem, like I have a lot of followers on social media. Someone sees me saying that, I'm probably going to lose followers. Like the whole point, like if you're going to have a following, and I just like a quick remark on the following, you have to risk having a following to have a following, or it's just like a bunch of dead sheep that following you, and that's not like genuine following. It might like look good for the numbers, but that I digress. That's here nor there. Like the point is, people are just too lazy to actually look at someone as a human being. And I think kind of tying it back to like what I was saying last week, it's everyone has these ideals, and these ideals are always filtered through some apparatus and not through experience as such. And then when you actually encounter other people and you actually think in terms of the experience as such, you realize that these value judgments are not fixed. It's more complex than that. And it's actually more interesting of a conversation of it's probably existentially more like anxiety because you don't have like an absolute stance, you know? Like it's like when you're friends with someone and they're like being real with you, it's like they do good and bad things, you know? You're still friends with them. And like you it's just like is he a good person? It's more like I'm friends with him. You know, it's not really like it doesn't really like that stuff is a tangent. And it also doesn't even make sense as a whole. Um I just think like people are lazy, and I think people are just like I hated so many people are like, "Oh, it's ironic. It's ironic he got killed by a gun." When he's talking about like gun violence in real time and he gets killed. It's like how is that the first thing to come across your mind? Like that it's some entertainment value. Like irony in its real sense isn't like an entertainment value thing. It is the movement of experience as such, how we understand it retroactively. Like that is what irony is. And we don't know enough about the situation, especially yesterday, for people to be saying that it's ironic. Like it's technically like only ironic if the gun is bought legally. We don't know that. Like, why do you jump straight to that kind of thing? I had so many friends say that, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ! Like, who gives a fuck if it's ironic or not? Like, why is that? Like, it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I guess I'll just leave it at this. Like, people are too lazy to actually sit with and tarry with the other, and it creates people operating under the goodness vector in terms of that is good and bad. Having a negation prior to uh saying, oh, how sad it is. I didn't agree with it. Like I almost started me talking just now in that mode. Like I almost did that, and I like caught myself, and I'm like, no, like Javier just made a good point, like with the Freud negation shit. Like I almost just did that because I have been programmed to like fear a little bit of being judged. And like these groups and these relationships like help me catch myself in the moment, and it actually, in a sad way, it creates division in like my other friends because they do not operate like that. I might feel closer to you guys, but it fucking sucks because it's like you're virtual. And like I wish it was like, yeah, we're just all in the same town. It would be sick if this was just like, yeah, I'm going over Daniels on Thursday. Like that would be the ideal thing. And like I don't know, I guess that doesn't really matter. But I'll just end it with that people are lazy. You got to sit with the fact that people do have good and bad instances, but as a whole, there needs to be a different descriptor or qualifier that is more ambiguous in the good sense. Where I bet the guy who shot Charlie Kirk, if he had a more ambiguous notion overall, he wouldn't have shot him. He only shot him because he's like, this is a bad dude. He's bad. Like, it's so myopic. It's so wrong. And then the fucked up thing is like people are like like liberals are like oh he was married, like he was a married man with the kids. It's like you can't even look at like what he did in terms of like any kind of good instance. Like he had public forums for arguing, for difference to meet. That is a good thing. Like, and then when I make that point to my friends, it's like, oh, it wasn't genuine. Oh, that's not his real intent. I'm like, how the fuck do you know that? Like, how do you know his intent? Like, you could say with like the Israel Palestine stuff, like Netanyahu's intent, because he's literally said it, you know, like he's made claims about his intent. If you're not, if they're not making like a claim about the intent, it's pretty hard to prove intent. Go to law school, you'll see. Like, go to, like, it's really hard to prove intent. Like, you can't just like kind of willy-nilly say the intent based off of like one conversation. You have to do a bunch of research. It is like a tall task to prove intent. So I just, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I'll pass it off. I got about to get my
No,
haircut.
absolutely. Your hair looks good. And why prove intent when I can just assert it? It's way easier, more efficient, et cetera, so forth. You said a lot that's very important. So first, the current media apparatus online actually creates incentive to be the first one to say something witty or something ironic because you will get followers. Therefore, wasn't ironic. He was taken by a gun, 900 likes, et cetera, so forth. So you have an incentive apparatus that then has people say those kind of things. But then since often, well, without philosophy, I basically think that language will use you more than you use language. And then those scripts actually go into your head like mental viruses and become your ideas. Because, Ayn Rand once said, and he was right about this, he was like, if you don't, philosophy is like secondhand smoke. Ideas are like secondhand smoke. You're just, without philosophy, you're just going to breathe it in from around you. And that will be what you think and what you say, et cetera, so forth. And so you have to have a self-defense mechanism of philosophy to avoid that. And Clayton, good to see you, sir. And basically, there's very little incentive for people to generate that because witty comments get them a lot of likes. Witty comments get them their friends to laugh and they're cool, seem cool. Also, people make witty comments to avoid an emotional comment. Because if I am told, what do you think of Kirk? And I have to say it's a terrible thing. Oh no, I might risk my tribe of liberal people, so I'll say something witty to say something about the topic because I feel pressure to say something about the topic. So I use wit to avoid the problem of how to say something that grieves without being seen as aiming with the enemy. And this is where jokes are used to fake speech, to make an appearance of speech. And it also seems like it creates an illusion of thinking about the problem. Because when I say it's ironic he was shot by a gun, it's like, oh, he's thought about his position relative to what occurred. That's a thoughtful comment. They must be thoughtful about their position. They might have thought about what occurred. So those are all social credit score goes up. They're beneficial to how you are seen as you avoid having to put your flag down on what happened, right, wrong, bad, good. You don't want to do that because that the issue is we're doing everything in our power to avoid the up is down, left, the earth is the ethical real is when God is dead. When the earth is unchained from the sun, up is down, left is right. How will we ever be worthy of this murder? It's when everything is the upside down land of a Stranger Things. And we don't want to go there because if you go there, you would have to see the truth of the human condition, which is really fucked up. So rather than do that, you rather just say something kind of funny or say something that will get you some approval and then move on. That's just where all the incentives are. Also, too, and then I'll give it to Dimitri, Daniel, Michael, and Mr. Jockin. Also, too, what ends up happening is as well, like you're saying, Luber, I agree. People like, why can't people face people they disagree with? Unfortunately, I hate to say this. I think actually very, very few people will actually practically hold on. This is what happens. Okay, so you go to church and somebody says something about Jesus that you don't like. And you kind of nod and you say, well, I disagree. And you go and you're like, oh, good, we can have difference. But then you miss a Sunday. You forget to talk to him that day. It's called the drift. The drift sets in, where you gradually and slowly just do a little less engagement. You never straight up say, I dislike that person. You just drift. The drift is the greatest threat. Because it's not that, because you don't want to ever come out and say, I'm not going to that church anymore or interacting with that person because they said something I disagreed with. You just get a little busy or you just Found another church that best fits you, the drift. And the drift that occurs inevitably without self-skepticism is a drift towards small fascist states. And so it's quite dire. There's more to say. I have more notes, but I'm going to give it to Dimitri, Daniel, Michael, and Mr. Jockin. Dimitri, please.
Yeah, hi. Okay, I think I want to respond to Daniel what you said about ownership and language. Like, does language own us, or is it the other way around? I think I had this experience yesterday where I noticed, and I think actually, Jockin, to hook on to your point, I think it takes the form of kind of this strange opposition between everything and nothing. The example is a little bit ridiculous, but I'll tell it for the sake of the argument. So there was this linguistics student, and he was basically we were talking, and he was telling us a lot of information about all this knowledge he had on all these obscure languages, and it was a little bit overwhelming how long he was going on. And so I was kind of like, okay, but, how do you know so much about linguistics? I think he didn't like me asking that, but I tried to be honest. And he ignored me. And then I touched his shoulder and was like, hey, did you hear what I said? I was curious to know how did you get into linguistics? And then he was like, oh, well, no, nothing, like nothing, I don't know, nothing. And then I was like, okay, that's pretty curious because you seem like in class you always have something to say, and I appreciate your comments. And then he was like, well, yes, I have 30 gigabytes of articles on my hard drive, and da da da. And so you see the nothing to everything. But in that very moment, there was like that's the obsessional. There was no other. There was just like nothing or total being, and he didn't cognize that oscillation. He didn't take note of it. So he just kind of continued with explaining some obscure languages. Yeah, and then I kind of drifted away from the conversation, so to say. Um, Anyhow, so today I read something on Facebook talking about the logic of the Whirlpool and Kirk that I want to get to. By the way, I think Kirk, I think that comes from church. I don't know if it's maybe Old English, but in Dutch, kerk is church, and I'm quite sure that Kirk is the etymology of church. So yeah. Anyway, so what I read this post. It says this: we do not want to normalize the social precedent of killing anyone for speech-related reasons on college campuses, regardless of ideology or message. Okay, can take note of that. And then this comment: killing anyone, I don't think anyone supports that. Doesn't mean some people may not deserve it. So this is the extent of the this is the crazy convulsion that we're increasingly heading towards, right? Like this massive, like gargantuan whirlpool opening up. Yeah, it's like Lovecraft's got nothing on the 21st century. Because I do think we're heading towards, Cadell has been calling it like a dictatorial point of violence. Like, okay, so like our liberal democratic framework, whatever you think of it, its law is grounded in violence, right? And also how that violence has been um, there's like the World War II consensus, and then there's been the ways that capitalism could keep, like, for example, outsourcing industry to China, which also was another impetus to have economic growth and stuff like this. But I mean, we're obviously like with all the crazy speculative financial things going around and the evident tensions, like we're gonna have more and more of this barging in of the non-rational of yeah whatever type of name it takes onto itself. And I mean, obviously, we're powerless in the face of that. Like, I'm talking just like each one of us individually in our lives. Like, we got work, we got these things we do, we have our friends, our relationships, and then we have this crazy media storm and these ideologies and elections. And I'm this really makes me think of something that I think this is underthought, like that just the way that the masses are super frustrated, they're melancholic, and they're furious. And like, what do we do with that? Like, what do we do with that? Because there's this thought, it's very prevalent on the left. It goes like this: okay, when there's a crisis, the people will somehow like distill a self-consciousness out of it, and they will come to us and vote on us next time. They will join our party. They'll finally see that whatever, the capitalism is coming to an end, and we have to create a new communist world. And it's never like this, right? Like, I mean, the populist right is ironically doing it way more like this, like way more successfully. But just the fact that the left is so dead, and like, so in the next German election, the AfD is going to be the biggest, so populist right will be in power in Germany, and it's so evident that they're not going to be allowed to rule. Like, it's just going to, it's similar to the Netherlands. Like, they're going to be in government, that's for sure, but there's going to be a whole bureaucratic apparatus which is going to see them as Nazis, which is actually not such a bad argument to make if you see where their logic is pointing to increasingly. And then that's gonna fill, and then we're gonna. I'm just thinking lately about the madness of our Western election cycles, because having been in Morocco, which is like formal democracy, but it's like you're not meant to take it seriously, really. Whereas in the States, in the Netherlands too, in Germany, which is kind of inspired all by America, we got this huge spectacular campaigns, and just the yeah, I just think it's so, I think it probably relates to the forgetting of history, and then takes, for example, the Chinese mindset, right? It's they're thinking about like what are we going to do in the 40s, in the 50s, and what about our 5 and 10 year plans. But I'm not sure if China is actually as stable as is claimed. I think China is much more of a mystery to us as well. Like, I'm not really sure how well we're thinking China, and I think so. This is a funny thing. I'm taking Africa lessons in uni, and we're thinking about Africa, and I noticed there's a similarity with, if we as Western people want to think Africa and China, and that is that it's very hard, not just because of Western propaganda, but also because of Chinese and African propaganda that just aims to prop these states up. And I don't think the truth is in the middle. I think the truth is somewhere, like, I think it's in the slips of these both of these discourses. I think it's in what both of these discourses maybe like edge towards, but miss out on, repress, try to rail against. And I'm not so sure what that means, but that's how I would like to approach these types of, yeah, theopolitical geopolitics, I guess. Yeah.
Magnificent. I'll just speak quickly, give it to Daniel, Michael, and then Jockin. I really like what you were saying on we go from nothing to everything and there's no oscillation. That's exactly right. The oscillation is difficult because then you have to judge percentage, judge the movement. That's Leibniz. You have to, like in the Analyst of Citos, you have to think proportion. You have to be in it. To go from everything to nothing, I don't have to be in it. I don't have to tarry with it. I just flip a switch. Flipping a switch is not being in it. Michelle and I have been talking about artificial lighting versus fire. It makes me think of that. Not to go down that. Also, too, I sometimes think, I think there's a way in which democracy becomes so extreme, say in the West, let's say America, because it's a way by which people can seem involved in thinking if they're not. And what I mean by that is most Americans don't read. For example, most Americans don't have intellectual conversations. But if I can say, hey, this was what's happening in the newspaper, I know what's going on in Washington, this is who I'm voting for, it creates a certain impression of research and involvement and being civically involved, of which is needed for the person to believe themselves as thoughtful and civically involved. And thus there's a odd, perhaps, correlation between the lack of, say, a I want to say thinking culture, or a culture of people of whom are engaged in things, and a certain extremism that arises. Now, one could counter that and say, well, don't we see in some cities where people are reading the top 10 nonfiction, New Yorker books, and isn't that sort of a culture of thinking, et cetera, so forth? No, to be quite mean, those books, you read the beginning, you read the end, you go to the middle, and then you flash through the case studies. They all have the same structure, and they do not present ideas that tarry with. They're neat. If people do read, In America, they tend to read books that are neat, give them neat idea, not ideas that could force them to change their lives. It gives them it enables them to have cocktail conversations, of which then makes them feel cultured. But if you're going to talk about like Aristotle or you're going to talk about Hegel, you're not invited to the cocktail party. And yet that is what's actually demanded. So there's a notable correlation, I think, between those things. And this is where one could speak of Tocqueville. Lastly, there is something about fascism that is non-global communism. Communism for Marx had to be global. It required a global revolution, and it was going to be based on the working class identity, which would be the non-rational basis of identity, and it could be global. And if that failed, as I know Cadell and Tut were speaking about, well, people are going to just replace it with another non-rational variable, and it will probably be more local. And that's going to become, well, fascism or white Christian instead of working class. Both of them have a similar structure. And I think one of the reasons why communism and fascism tend to fight so much is actually because they're so similar. And yet the difference is mega. And has to be thought out, because also fascism, communism has markets, that they just don't have a logic of capital of which is dominating the subject, right? And so fascism also has markets. It's just that they have, say, in China, state winners, because I would argue China is actually more fascist than communist on the national level, because one, they are ethnically very similar, and they do have state winners, which is a clear characteristic of fascists, and my friend Mr. Riley and I would describe that. And I have more, but I will stop and give it to Daniel. Daniel, thank you for being here, sir.
No, I mean it's wonderful to be here, and the speech that has passed between people who have spoken and been put forward, it's really it's nourishing, and it's in a kind of spaciousness. So there's an appreciation for everyone that's spoken already, for the ideas that have been put forward. I think it's kind of enacting this dwelling in the Gödel point has been used as the idea, like it's performatively doing that, which doesn't it's the uncomfortability of not closing, and so then weighing in on something like that it has to have this something like a tension or something like an anxiety, and like this pressure to respond that we've spoken about. There's like pressure to you need, obviously you have to respond, you have to have an opinion about this, because like it's so intense or pivotal, or I mean it's a 9/11 today as well. I remember seeing I think I was like I'm not going to do the math now, but like 5 or 6, and yeah, I have this. I can remember seeing a plane flying into buildings, and just this like weird atmosphere amongst the adults in the situation, and then seeing this, like someone shot, like you see this image, it's on a screen, but then I'm also trying to find the image also, like I want to see it in this background doubt around AI image generation, and then this constant question of like, what does it mean for me to respond to this? How do I respond to this? And like the only reason I knew the name Kirk, apart from like media osmosis, was because I've cultivated a relationship with an elder white Christian politically conservative person, and he's been a fan of Kirk, and then there's also like a general conservative political commitment around all the people that he's around. But if I hadn't cultivated this relationship, like I wouldn't know the person, nor would I have just this buffer or the space in which I don't fall immediately into what Javier said, which I thought was like the logos paralyzing the pathos. Like there's this huge stimulus, this event that happens, and then it can only go like one or two ways. Like the logos of the situation is like you can only respond in boom boom, and both having the structure that we pointed to, that like this is the good response and this is the good response, and if you don't do this one, and it's like just also because my personal investment and involvement, it's like it's frightening for me, or the it's this it's the Christian right, it's the Christian right link that gets, so like something that I saw. It's like if you support the ideologies of the kind of person that would shoot the gun, then you need to like examine yourself and repent. And because like spiritual warfare is about powers and principalities, and it's these ideologies that are taking over, and it's like it's so wild to be implicated like that. And also like the certainty that position conveys. And why I'm even mentioning it, or why it irks me, is because it's in this realm of like the the perversion of the best is the worst, and the it's just it's so unfortunate what happens around the site of Christ, or of Jesus. And like, what does one do if one is invested or attempting to follow? And this is the this Daniel, you're using the language of drifting. So I mean, maybe I'll confess myself. Like when I saw that news, the Bible verse that popped into my mind was like, live by the sword, die by the sword, something to this effect. And then I've wrestled a lot with like how appealing a polemic is to my psyche and to my relationships, because it can kind of it can neuter that drift. Like if I just get a bit of that fire of the polemic, it keeps me engaged in relationships. I also have investment in, like, if I just feed the polemic a little bit, then I can gather people toward my view. But also I can it sustains a kind of tension in relationship. So if you're unwilling to play at a polemic, but playing at the polemic and then getting bitten by or biting it is then, and I think the language of sword when you're playing with polemics is a it's a I think it's appropriate. Um, this yeah, I guess the it's yeah, maybe an impossible question, or like a wondering, like I'm wondering, and the question has a like what. No, let me pass it back now, and if I can formulate the question better, I'll pop the hand up again. It's good to be a.
It's wonderful to have you, Daniel, and I'll give it to Michael, Jockin, and Javier. What you said, I very much appreciate it. Absolutely. A key way you stop drifting is war or conflict or enemy, because then if they drift, they die. If you drift away and you don't unify with us, we're in trouble. So you can stop. We have not figured. The problem of drifting is one we have socially not figured out how to stop without basically creating a vector of the good, right? You create some vector of the good versus the evil, and therefore that brings people together, right? Like the only beauty can stop drifting because you're attracted, right? But what you see is drifting, or exit, as Jockin has said with GOP. What ends up happening is you just exit, but you exit in a way to avoid looking like you're exiting. That's what people do, because you don't want to be seen as exiting. You just want to get busy. You just want to, oh, I haven't had the time. That's what people do. So they drift, and then the social fabrics break, and then they break. So I really appreciate that point. The other thing and then I'll give it to Mike. You definitely see, as people are saying, political violence is never justified. There's that idea that you should not do it and it should always be in discussion. Everyone in the back of their mind knows that World War II, Civil War, there have been examples where political violence was actually, in most people's minds, justified. There is a point where it's actually apparently okay to engage in political violence. And that's the dark, 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 dark basement that people do not want to bring into the discourse, because once you do that, you are facing the whirlpool. You've got an issue now. And we don't know how to think that, because the whole argument of the American Civil War was it's the war of northern aggression, that this is political violence. We have a right to succeed. That's why it was called the United States of America. Yet, like you could separate, And there has never in history been a constitution that you had to stay in. Lincoln had to invent the idea of the Union as a metaphysical construct to get over the legal arguments that said secession was justified. I can go on. That's why the Southerners, the Confederacy, never called it a civil war. It's no civil war. We're not in the same nation. It's the Second American Revolution, actually, because we're fighting the New Britain, which is the North. That was their argument. And they said also that the North couldn't have cared less about slaves. It was all about creating a new form of slavery they benefited from in the factories. So basically, the South saw the North. The South critiqued the North like Marxists. Factories is a form of wage slavery. They don't care about slaves. They just want to make more slaves. And what they want to do is unleash slavery upon all races and all people to increase profit margins. It goes crazy. It goes crazy. It goes nuts. So let's not talk about that. Let's not look at the reality of historical conflicts. So when they crop up again in their whirlpool, knowledge of good and evil, ethical whirlpool, and we get pulled down, we can think it's an innovation. It's not an innovation. It's called history repeating, because we haven't dealt with the problem of forgiveness, and we haven't dealt with the problem of giving the knowledge of the fruit of the good and evil back, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil back to the tree. We're still clinging on to it, and the ethical real is tearing us apart. But let me give it to Michael, Mr. Jockin, Javier. So anyway.
It's great to be here. I'm going to try not to step on any landmines, or maybe step on all of them. We'll see. Um, so the thing that I've been thinking about, I mean, there's many things that I've been thinking about, but many of them have already been said. The thing that I've been reflecting on during this conversation about the whole Kirk situation is the distinction between the kind of moral implications of a response to a view that you don't like versus the view itself. So a lot of my liberal lefty friends are maybe they're not saying gun violence is justified, but they're very quick to point out who Charlie Kirk was and why they don't agree with him, and kind of pointing out the irony of, how conservatives seem to not talk about. I mean, we had a school shooting yesterday too. It's not making the news. And liberals are like, well, Trump's flying the flag at half mast today for Charlie Kirk's murder, but where is he when all these school shootings happen? And kind of the hypocrisy there. But what I just feel is like the danger with that, even if you agree with it on its face of the hypocrisy, is if we're allowed to separate someone's views from the reprehensible action that gets inflicted upon them as a result, then we're basically setting a precedent that that's okay. And so if it's okay, what's going to stop a conservative from doing it to a liberal that me and my friends like? It's like, where does that logic, just as much as you might take solace and comfort in that logic, it can be used against you. And so it's just absurd to me, and it just makes no sense, and it's not doing anybody any favors. And so that's kind of just been sitting with me, and but then again, Daniel, what you say about, well, there is a line where it becomes you've exhausted all other options, in the lead up to World War II. It's like you've exhausted all. I mean, the British were so gung-ho on appeasement, and I think they were in denial about the fact that it was not going to work with Hitler, because they kept trying. I mean, they, like, in 1938, I don't think it was Chamberlain, but someone else was like, "Oh yeah, I think Hitler can be reasoned with," and it was just like, it's so obvious that that's not the case. But I mean, are you seriously going to make the same association with Charlie Kirk? Like, are you gonna go there? And I think, we've just seen throughout history since the beginning of time, how societies respond to political assassinations like is is such a key litmus test of where that society is going to go. And I mean, I can see one scenario where this just continues to snowball, and I mean, the irons have been, you know, been put in the cauldron from January 6th to multiple assassination attempts on Trump to this. And if there's not some kind of, I don't know what a broad scale reconciliation would look like, but if the rhetoric changes from picking apart ideology to justify or either not to justify, to either like raise him up as some, I don't know, some sacrificial lamb or some martyr or someone, or to like denigrate him, where it just becomes, this is a tragedy, and like let's just have concern for the human being here, and let's all face each other in our grief, either grief around this person who some people love or they love the ideas, or the other side who are grieving, you know, I don't, uh, gun violence. Like if we can collectively sit with each other and feel what we're feeling and figure out how to move forward in a way that doesn't cause, our our societal threads to literally rip apart from each other, then like, I mean, the writing's on the wall of what happens when that doesn't happen. There were some other thoughts I had, but yeah, I'll turn it back.
Absolutely, the writing is freaking on the wall, and if people, when also people are hopeless or they have no hope, they think the American dream is dead, blah 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 blah. Then and thank you, Dimitri, and Clayton as well, very much. Then they become nihilistic, and when people are nihilistic, they're on the brink of being suicidal, and therefore the idea of going down fighting, which is not suicide, you get killed in like a fight in the city or whatever, that becomes rational to people. That's not a bad option when you're already nihilistic and hopeless, but you also, so it's like, yeah, you might die, but it's not suicide. It's fighting in some sort of final battle to save America. There are lots of it. That's why you could argue the most important demographic at times, fourth turning times, are the young men. Young men are the ones you really want to keep your eye on. And frick, we have an issue. The ethical real. So the issue is too. What I want to say. Okay, so I think what people would counter, and this is why we're screwed, or that's why when you're stuck in the vector of the good, you're screwed, is people would say, okay, yes, the humanity of Kirk, sure. But when my child starved to death because of actions of the US government, no one cared. And I am being asked to care about the death of Kirk because he was an extremist, which rose him to prominence, which means he stroked anger. And so you're mad at me for not caring about him because he gamified the system to be an extremist, but you couldn't have cared less. If no one made you feel bad for not saying some words about my starving child, so people feel oppressed to have a view about Kirk because he did something immoral to rise to the top, where now we all have to, the very fact we have to decide how we're going to react to Kirk for many people is because Kirk did something horrible. So it's unfair. That very pinning down in the Sardian sense is unfair. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the knowledge of good and evil is quite terrible. The internally consistent system is unstoppable. If you're stuck in the internally consistent system, there is always a logic to justify whatever position you want to take. And if you want to take a position that says you're bad, I'm good, no one ever can force you to change, except a bullet. And that's what it always comes down to, because what did Clausewitz says? That war is politics by different means. So in a sense, there's no such thing. The idea of political violence, that's a misnomer. Violence is politics for Clausewitz. So this idea of the stopping of political violence, if you're stuck in the problem of internally consistent systems, politics inevitably is violence. And so simply talking about getting rid of political violence is a nicety for a script that you use and may genuinely believe to convince yourself you're not the kind of monster who thinks it's okay to engage in violence, but when the time comes, you were fighting a monster. Oh, and by the way, if you kill a monster, you're not committing murder because they're a monster. They're not human, and you can only commit something immoral against a human being. Therefore, you're a good person. This is the key. This is the key move. Great violence happens when, so why was it okay in the Confederacy to enslave black people? Because black people aren't human. Therefore, it's not immoral. So it's fine. You can't go to jail for killing an animal for most of history. And even now, it's not considered murder to kill an animal, right? So all you do is ontologically place them down, because here's the key. If black people aren't human, I do something terrible to a black person, I did nothing wrong, right? That's what's happening. The other side are not in a way fully human. Therefore, you're not a bad person to mistreat them. And that's why the language of monster, not etc. That's the beginning of the end, because you are basically categorizing them. Because here's the case. No one thinks they do something unethical. What they do is change the ontological status of the person of whom they are treating terribly in a manner where it is not mistreatment. So that's what ends up happening. Kirk is Goebbels. Well, that's what people can say. Kirk is basically Goebbels. And yes, it is not good to murder. But if they're, Goebbels, wouldn't you kill Goebbels? Wouldn't you shoot Hitler or something like that? I mean, wouldn't you? So you categorize them. You define them in a manner where they are the exception. The exception. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, history is a long story of the exception being the place where all the horror happens. It's only, it's good people that do terrible things, because when they do terrible things, it's in regard to the exception, which doesn't define them because they weren't human. That slip of the hand of making the one you mistreat not human, therefore you did nothing wrong, is the key, in my opinion, to great evils, right? Because there's an ontology. And Michael, did you want to say something, sir, real quick? Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw something very quickly in. I'm thinking about the Luigi Mangione killing, and how the assassin in Charlie Kirk's case, I mean, I have to imagine that he wanted Charlie Kirk to be a symbol of what he was attacking. The views and the rhetoric that he holds is like a symbol of what he's attacking, and in the Luigi case, it's the same thing. So I think these like symbolic slayings are something really interesting to tarry with, because there's this like snowball effect that they have beyond just, I mean, we were talking about that. I mean, some people still are, but like we were talking about that Luigi murder for like weeks after that. And like that's exactly the point. And so I think there's also a lot to be reckoned with there about, yes, there's obviously the ethics of what was done. But there's also like the kind of symbology in the conversation that sparks as a result.
100%. And I also want to note how quickly people are coming up with conspiracies, that it was an insider job, because even if you have no evidence of that, that gets clicks. So we have a incentive apparatus to create possible narratives, which, by the way, you don't know it wasn't an inside job. You don't know that some foreign government. So you click it. And so that also, it's a signifier in the same way that Javier was saying. And yes, that is what we are primarily dealing with. And then people take their scripts, people take their lines, and they say their lines that they need to say to stay in their tribe, and nothing advances. There's more to say, but let me give it to Mr. Jockin. Mr. Jockin.
Javier's coming in with the hot takes that I'm about to reply to, because I was about to say, there's so many points here. I think the first one is, isn't it interesting that the abstractional object of the symbol versus the population, and actually is one of the first moves that are happening here, meaning the attacks of aggression to a symbol, and then the counter argument, well, what about this populational group? People from Gaza, take your pick, right? Whatever category. So there's like something interesting about that, because they're both abstractions. It's kind of interesting. And then I'm going to leave my next part, which is, it's one of my favorites. I feel like if there's every expression I've fallen in love with, I came right into, is mythos is logos defanged of necessity. What I mean by that is, no one is dying for Zeus. But people, and this is actually very important. I say this because, for example, the reason why this has been said, I forgot, I apologize if it was Michael or yourself, Danny, I apologize. But one of you said, well, no, it's okay that this happened to Kirk because he was promoting evil. And you know what that evil was? Transgenderism, like basically the attack on transgenderism. And I say this because I'm just bringing this up, Daniel. And now I'll segue what you're saying is that so this argument of the slip of the personhood. This was the argument of why Kirk and this political group was evil, was because their rhetoric was the claim was depersonalizing a population of transgenderism, for example, and that by them being giving legitimacy, which is, by the way, the critique about why by you, this is part of this rhetorical stance of bringing appearance of awareness of a position legitimizes it, right? This is 2010. It's the entire political discourse of the 2010s coming to a culmination, basically, because this was the argument. If you gave Kirtland legitimacy by giving him a platform and even addressing that he acknowledged that he exists, you're legitimizing an argument that says that transgenders are not real people based on their ontological status. And that now by killing him and what he represents, this kind of rhetoric of political discourse, this was a good thing because he was othering. No, I'm not kidding. This you can see the map. The map is indestructible. It's perfect. It is completely legitimate. I see Daniel Andrew gesticulating with very far strong force. But see, so transgenderism, as Daniel, as you pointed out, it's this great little tirade movie you did with the discussion of rhetorical reframing of the Civil War, of Lincoln interjecting union, right? Union as a symbolic part of logos. See, logos always requires an archive, first principle, to justify the akine necessity. Remember, there's two kinds of necessity in Greek, right? There's akine, that kind of absolute, the mathematical, always the case. If this is not the case, it is falsehood in its full absolute sense. But there's another kind of necessity. This is actually important. This is actually what one can make an argument kind of restored mythos would do is demand. They kind of actually using actually economics. It's a conditional. It's basically the modus ponens mode of hypothetic necessity Aristotle uses, where he says that if X, then Y. If this is the case, then this would follow with that. It's not this absolute demand of pure necessity. Because pure necessity within logos absolutely drives. Like you will have this motion and movement, and then you will kill for this. Because when this gets pushed to the limit, it has to get released in some way, as we're discussing. No one's dying for Zeus, but people will die under a certain political distance. It's an interesting watch and see what first principle people are going to die for. Transgenderism, whiteness, and this is also a very strong tension. It's very interesting because the argument is the political body of a state. Who's dying for the United States? Who's dying for your country? It's a historical virtue, right? Patriotism. And there's actually some rhetorical tensions about that in terms of when is it right and fitting to die for your country, to serve your country and to die for it, and when not to. I bring this up because, for example, Plato in Crito, he's wrong. He has every legitimacy on an individual level to not be subject to the laws of Athens, to escape, reject it. And the whole point of that dialogue is to point out, no, Plato has Socrates say, no, I will stay. I will take this answer. I will take this judgment, even if done wrong to me. It does not matter because what's his first principle? The law personified to him and rebukes him to say, if you deny me and you run away, what kind of person would you be? What would this say about you? And he said, and this person in his law of personification goes on to say, your state is like your father, and his historical framing, right? Your parents. If they command you to go fight in a war and you should die, it is right that you do so. Like it's this lot. You can see the logic built into that. I just say this because I know we have some ex-military in the group. I remember I've asked ex-military before. It's like, how many of them actually are like, yeah, I'm dying, I'm serving my country. They're like, no. That's absolutely nothing. Well, what's courage? Is courage being discussed in a military conversation? Like, you think that'd be the first principle, like something like that? No, not. That's. I find this the fanged logos with necessity attached to its first principle, and by the saying that they're completely mutually exclusive, and they cannot interact with each other. And more importantly, I wish Dimitri was here, because this whole idea of, like, I think it was him who made this comment, that it's not like two extremes, you find the middle, that's the truth. No, the truth is in the slippage between the extremes. I think it's a really important detail, because to ask that question, well, wait a minute, these two principles that seem completely dialectically opposed from each other, having the dispositional state to say there's something we can learn. What can we learn from this? I don't know what it is beforehand, but what is in the ruptures that come up? What can we learn from this? That's a very different position that would require a very different relationship to logos, defanged of necessity, like I'm talking about. Now, I think one idea is, like, the project of postmodernity was supposed to defang logos. Like, that was this whole project. The deconstruction movement was supposed to defang logos of this kind of demand of necessity, kind of tying to actually Dimitri's original comments about structuralism and linguistics. But as we're seeing, you can't just do that. You can't just, because it failed. It didn't work. You can't just absolutely annihilate necessity, logos. You can't do it, not all the way. And think we're just going to hang out in mythos with, again, no one here is dying for Zeus. Like, that's how we know it's defanged necessity, because that first principle does not have this force of truth, of necessity attached to it. So I just sit here and go, but that's the point. Like, that's kind of like our project almost, is like the postmodernist like the next step, whatever we're going to name this, the metamodernism, question mark, whatever. It's almost like we have to answer that question. What is the next step if we're going to go from deconstruction, this defanging of logos? And it's probably, actually, no matter what, I always miss this idea, this playing closing on the statement. So going from defanging logos of necessity to go to mythos, it's actually ethos, or an ethos, actually, character. It's actually the return of virtue in character, because that's the only way to have a subject would kind of be, you have fun with this Hegelian state position a little bit. It's only in virtue of character that one can have a dispositional state to encounter difference, to go in the girdle point, and actually not let the force, the vectors of good, that necessity that a logos account will give you, and orient you with absolute certainty. It'll give you all that. Because, by the way, I think actually another actually, you know what's interesting now? Maybe what is our fanged logos right now? Safety. I think safety is a big one, because actually I've noticed that's come up a lot. That's actually the argument made about why are we doing these interventions? Why are we going to have basically like watch lists now? Why are all these, like, what is the exception? What's the logic of this exception, as Daniel's pointing out? It's going to be safety. It's going to be absolutely that. Because safety gives you kind of certainty, and that's certain, et cetera. So I can see all that playing out. And I'm going to close on this one last note related to that, which is Dan Luber made a comment about, and he's off the call, but he'll watch the recording, about friendship, right? Friendship, relationships. Why we're not encountering difference. But watch the rhetoric. We're so not equipped for this. Protect your peace. Or what did Javier say? Like, gotta maintain the vibes, man. You can't have those bad vibes. You're done. We're so done. It's so over, because this model of exit, right? The geopathic algorithmic mode. This is algorithmic thinking. Exit. Unsubscribe. Don't have any. I can't even have people in my media spaces, discourse spaces, that have difference. This is the logic of 2010's rhetoric playing out. This is all playing out, like how disastrous this is. It took about a decade to see how bad of a decision it was made to go, no, we're going to unsubscribe now everybody that you don't have a relation, like you disagree with their political stance or their accounts. They're breaking up they're messing around with your map a little bit. A little too much difference for your preference. Nope, exit, gone. And by the way, which leads to this kind of like moral panic of having the pro signal, like, I'm on your tribe, bro. Like, don't unsubscribe me. Don't unsubscribe me. I'm safe. Because it was that language, that safety. Watch again. Here we go again. Another move of that. Oh, it's so good. But it's so over. And notice again, like this, and then what is the object of necessity, this first principle? Closes one more time. It can both be a symbol, right? The Kirk, right? Symbol of this political discourse, or a population as the symbol, which is even more crazy because it's not an individual. Because at least the Greeks would understand this, like a doing violence to a political position. Like that's the thing, you're attacking the whole state, not just an individual. Like that mapped on, but this idea of a population, the way we're talking about it, this is a very different animal. This is a very different category. So I'm going to leave it at that, but this is a fascinating conversation.
Yeah. So first off, we have an internet. So generally, I think the internet weakens our nervous system. It makes us less able to handle encountering otherness as it simultaneously connects us with radical otherness. And so it's a kind of, it can be a trap, actually, because it gives you this impression of connectability and sociability as you actually learn the new nervous system to handle difference. And then if the encounter with difference goes poorly, the system benefits because it's all evidence that we should let AI take over and that humans suck, right? So the system actually has no incentive to make us able to handle otherness because it seems to be evidence that we should be less human, which is what the system wants, the flows of capital, AI, et cetera, so forth. So I think we have to use the internet in a manner that does not weaken our emotional immune system, as Ardesh and I would talk about, or our nervous system, and that's what we're doing. Which any hope for alternative community that is not fascist requires people to have a nervous system to handle anxiety. And if that is destroyed, then the only communities that will be formed that are in real life, that have organizations, buildings, will in essence be fascist. And then in that very fascism, though, they will weaken their ability to handle difference and otherness because they get the comfort and belonging and meaning of people that have that social agreement and flow. And when they inevitably encounter otherness from within that community, they especially won't be able to handle it. And now we have conflict and war because, as we talked about last time, the problem with small fascist states is that natural resources are not evenly distributed. China has lithium, we don't. You better learn how to get along and interact with them. Also, different people around the world know different things that you don't know, and you don't even know you don't know it. So you need to interact with, and then you're screwed. Yes, the ethical real always shows up and reminds you that all otherness is actually ultimately an ethical difference. That is the only actual otherness. When we talk about, oh, this person is black, I'm white, no. That's not the real otherness because there's lots of black conservatives or black Christian or whatever you want to say. No. The real other is the ethical other. The one that has a different ethical system from you, because they are the one that you think is a demon. They're the ones you can't fit in your system, because if you did, it would make your system evil. So you can't do that, because you have to be motivated by what you think is good. By definition, that's Augustine. You cannot do that which you think is evil. You cannot. If you kill someone, you think it's good to kill them. It's impossible. So to actually bring another into your system, that the reason why this is so impossible and so difficult is because you can't want to do that. You can't want to do that. You have to force yourself to do it. But how are you going to force yourself to do it without necessity? Without a God saying, if you don't, you're going to hell. Or I command you to do it. Or, you know what I think the force of necessity has been for people? Your job. You have to pay the bill. You must go and deal with people you don't want to deal with. And it doesn't matter. If we don't have necessity, we're not going to do that which we necessarily experience as bad. We won't. And to bring them into our lives, into our community, unless God tells me to do it, I ain't doing it, because that would be evil. So we have a major issue. But the ethical real always unveils that all difference is ethical. But here's the problem. What's happening now is everyone, say in the Fentes, and as a warning, everyone, I do have a stupid wedding that I have to get everything set up. So I will have to go in a bit, but I'm going to push it as much as possible until the person shows up at the gate and wonders where I am. And I'll say the ethical real. So the ethical real. So what's happening is everyone is following ethics. This is the million. So this is what it will all come down. Well, this is a huge claim. This is what it's all going to come down to. Are you going to find your ethics in a map or between maps? Are you going to find it in a map? Well, then you're in a small fascist state. Everything always comes back to an ethos. Just like you said, Mr. Jack, it always will come back to ethics because culture is ethics. Culture wars are ethics. It's all ethics. It's all the knowledge of good and evil at war with one another. And if it's not between maps, it's in a map, then we're screwed. We've got to fight for the ethics between maps, but where the frick does your force of necessity come from between maps if necessity is in maps? Maps create the intelligibility of the necessity. Well, beauty. It has to be something, the matrix versus the vector. It has to be it has to be the Gödel point. We have to be able to operate in a place that is transcendent of our immediate categories, because all categories of thought necessarily fall into the internal consistency of our intelligibility. So we have to do that of which doesn't readily fit into a category, but an activity that categories lead to that then is naked in. And that's negative. Also, what you're saying about safety, yes, that's exactly what fascists and strong government, it's to keep you safe. We're going to see, Trump has already made it crystal clear that he will be using what happened with Kirk to justify making us safer. Also, too, there are two key lines that I think are just metaphysically true, although I will not justify them today. What you judge is what you become, and what you fear is what comes unto you. And a world obsessed with safety is afraid of bad things happening and violence, that thus guarantees it. Because safety is precisely the condition of which people rebel against in order to live, not just be alive. Also, too, as a final point, I do think sometimes the move from the individual to the group, like you're saying, okay, Kirk, yeah, it was bad, but look what he's done to transsexuals or the woke people. I actually think what's going on is a subconscious move of using the trolley problem. Like, people don't know they're doing that. They're saying, hey, if I have to kill one person to save 5, maybe it's okay. So what you're doing is you're comparing a particular with an abstraction, which is the structure of the trolley problem, indirectly without you realize you're doing it. And thus, who in the world wouldn't kill the 5 to save the 1 on the trolley problem, right? So you're using subconsciously a very bad ethical thought experiment that I despise to basically put forth a moral argument that is subconsciously the trolley problem. That's what you're doing. And because the abstraction is a vast category, so it's like I'm saving many people. To kill 1 to save many people, well, that's just the trolley problem, basically. But if I were to say, hey, can I kill Kirk to save Sarah 1 for 1? That doesn't have any moral thrust. Even if you were to get a liberal who thought Kirk was the most evil person on planet Earth, if I said you can kill, you got Sarah here and you got Kirk. Is it okay to kill Kirk to save Sarah? They will hesitate, baby. If they got to see the face of this, they are not going to do that stuff. And so, Mr. Jockin, please.
Just want to interject on that. I just want to interject on one point. But what if Sarah is a trans woman?
Yeah, then that's right, because you bring them into the category. And therefore, she represents the many.
Class as an object becomes that's what that person is.
Yeah, that's right. Because if Sarah was just a white conservative who believed in everything Kirk did, it would not have no moral thrust to it. And in fact, so it changes everything. So you have to smuggle in a trolley problem indirectly. It's a 1 for the many structure. And the only way you can have a 1 for the many is to compare it with some sort of abstraction or standing in for more than 1 life, because it is morally acceptable to kill 1 to save many, blah, 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 in people's subconscious minds, or at least it's part of the script that makes it acceptable. So yeah, that's why you always want to deal with the face. And there was something, but I will stop and give it to Javier, Daniel, and Michael. Mr. Rivera.
You know what I never understood about the COVID pandemic? Because Jockin brought up safety, and it made me think of when people panicked and they bought toilet paper. Why was that the signifier? Toilet paper. Out of all things, not water, not food. I mean, I was born in Florida, right? So we have a lot of hurricanes. I'm used to the whole protocol of you stock up on food, you stock up on water. No one has ever freaking panicked about toilet paper. That was probably the most jarring panic of just oh my God, there's no toilet paper. And it was wow, that was crazy that the world panicked, and it was toilet paper was the safety signifier. If I have toilet paper, I'm good. If we don't have toilet paper, we're fucked. It was so interesting. The other thing is something that Cadell has been saying that I feel I'm starting to sort of disagree with. Because Cadell's saying Cadel's saying that we're going more towards like a perverted society. I actually think we're going more towards a psychotic society. And the reason why I say that is because Cadell actually said something to me at the Stumping Grounds, where he said, telling the difference between psychosis is hard. I think it's hard between perversion. I think neurosis and psychosis is hard to determine between. Why? Because, and here's the interesting feature about psychosis. Psychosis mimics what the neurotic does. That's why it's hard to tell whether it might be a psychotic society or a neurotic society. The other feature of psychosis is certainty. Neurotics has doubt. And that's why I think when we talk about these political ethical reels, is that what makes me hesitate and say I don't think we're going into perverted. I still have to think about that more, but I think psychosis will be the feature, because psychosis is certain. Psychosis, before it becomes into a meltdown, before it becomes psychotic, it maintains itself by mimicking until it maintains itself until it breaks, right? So that's why I find it interesting. And then also memory. Memory is a big feature about psychosis, because they're not interested. They have no memory. There is no memory in psychosis. Okay. And what I see here is that the world is striving more and more to eliminate memory. If you eliminate memory, you eliminate repression, and then you also eliminate the unconscious. That's what's ironic about a psychotic society. If we're heading towards there, a psychotic society says, actually, here's the thing. A psychotic society is a fully transparent society. And a fully transparent society is a society that has no unconscious. And that is when a society is making up its own mythos. There is no mythos agreed upon or given. It's you have left them to construct their own. It's the man saying, I think I'm the president of the United States. And nobody can stop him. Like, nobody can intervene in that kind of thing. Yeah, AI self-confirmation. Correct. This is what I'm afraid of, that actually, because neurosis and psychosis can be so hard to determine, because of precisely this mimicry that psychosis can do, that actually we can be very much fooled into not seeing that we're falling into a psychotic society. Lack of memory, so on. Basically, we're stripping away. We want full transparency. And yet it's the most violent of transparencies that you will ever get. This is why the analyst has to intervene. The analyst has to give them a necessity. That's what's interesting. That's what I like what Jockin was saying, is that you have to stabilize the psychotic by giving them a necessity. If not, they will try to create meaning themselves. And if you leave them to create meaning themselves, it leaves nothing but to violence. So yeah, that's something that that's really made me think about. And the other thing that, Michael, you said there was another school shooting, right? There was a school shooting. What's interesting to me about that, and you're like, oh, nobody's really talking about it. It's Charlie Kirk right now. What's interesting to me about that is both of them technically signify gun violence. But here's the thing. This is where Charlie Kirk signifies more than gun violence, because they can't even be connected to each other to make an actual coherency, right? So that's what I find fascinating, is that Charlie Kirk obviously means more than gun violence, right? And the other thing is, I wonder if when people say school shootings, because here's the signifier that changed once school shootings actually became more rampant. They said it's another school shooting. Another. That's the key word. Another. There's not another Charlie Kirk. There's another school shooting. That kind of already defangs the sentimentality of a school shooting. Have you heard there's another school shooting? Like it just automatically, like, it's not worth the news, almost the attention. So that's what I think is interesting with the Charlie Kirk kind of signification and what it means. But yes, this polemic between group and people, between particularity and a group of people. I mean, I experienced this when I was a Muslim. I had so many people tell me, "Oh, Islam's misogynistic." Right? Is that the only signifier that you can give to understand Islam? Right? But I felt that violence because I was the representation of that violence for them. Right? I was the very thing that was antagonistic to them. Islam is misogynistic, therefore you are misogynistic. Right? Like it just all translates, but nobody's asking me, is that how you view it? Is that how you see it? For me, it was like, well, it's complicated, right? It's all complicated. I mean, it's not straightforward, but I don't think that's the thing that defines it. So that to me is the ethical real. The ethical real is, like you're saying, Daniel, is the unrepresentable portion of what we have to do, what we're required to do. Everybody thinks, oh, it's clear as day what we should do. That's imitating, that's following. No, it's only like, and I like this word that Dimitri used because it's very, psychoanalytic. It's the slippage that tells us what we should do, right? Last thing, my girlfriend just told me a story about these two kids playing in a playground, and they were playing a game that they shouldn't have played, and they were playing in such a way that the boy ended up breaking like one of his hips. And here's the thing, though. This is where the other the parents of the girl get scared and anxious because they don't know how the other parents are going to interpret that event, right? Because if you look at the situation is they were playing a game they weren't supposed to. This is the consequences of the game. Now, what would a parent of the child's broken leg? Notice how broken leg, my child, signifies, oh my God, my child, broken leg. That already signifies what kind of parent are you going to get? Are you going to get the parent that's like, you did this to my child? Or are you going to get a parent that's understanding and say, I understand it was an accident. I understand that you guys were playing a game that you guys shouldn't have played. And this is the anxiety that is stirring in the parents, the parents' mind of the girl, right? They're like, oh my God, am I, are they going to villainize, because already the girl feels guilty. So it's already traumatizing in a way because it was just a game. They were just playing a game. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
100%. The liability. So I'll give it to Daniel, Michael, and I do greatly apologize that I have to go to the venue, but I'll have to close there because I have to put down chairs and meet people. Yeah, people say they're upset that there aren't playgrounds at school. No, they're not, because if there are playgrounds, liability, something bad happens, they don't want to face that anxiety. Also, people don't want to face negativity because then I'll get sued or that person will destroy my career. So it's all like people want to say there's like, wow, we're such a coddling of the American mind. It's so terrible that they're coddled. No, people are thrilled we're coddled because of the liability. They say, man, it's horrible that kids are on screens all the time. No, you love having the kids on the screen because you don't have to worry about them breaking legs or hurting another kid or some other stuff that you can't afford and the healthcare costs and all those different things. So, but we don't want to, no one is going to say the line, I'm glad we're coddled, because it doesn't fit in the script. It doesn't fit in an internal consistency. So what you do is say you go against it and just happen to never actually use an alternative playground or just happen to never have your kids do something dangerous. You're always about to. Perhaps nothing is more useful than the always about to for self-image. I also want to say people like the mini because, like you're saying, I stand for the mini in the same way that you have this trolley problem, I or mini. Likewise, if I stand for Christianity, if I stand, it gives me a certain power. So that's another reason why I think that we employ abstraction to what you were saying. I was also going to say that Mr. Ivan Illich stresses that the current regime intentionally creates disablement in the culture to create a force of necessity by weakening us. So you've lost necessity. So let's make you have no skills, rely on services for food, and be totally disabled and make you out to be crazy if you learn how to build your own house or get survival skills or whatever. And so you're disabled. So it creates a kind of false necessity. As we were saying, necessity is necessary. So it's necessity via disablement is what Ivan Illich wants to say. It's how we've dealt with people need necessity to get along. So let's make them incapable of doing anything so that what is necessary is that of which gets them food, water, etc., so forth. Of course, this is a very different from necessity. The real question is, how do you have a society that creates necessity for extraordinary people? How do you have extraordinary people like saints or great warriors or great artists and put them under the force of necessity? That's how you have a healthy society. We don't know how to do it. So what we do is create necessity via making everyone a last man. Yeah. Also, psychosis. Yes, psychosis and neurotic. So psychosis has certainty. So psychosis is isomorphic to the neurotic. The neurotic does not have certainty, therefore it can be questions, and the centralization can break up into the psychosis. The strength of psychosis is that it has certainty because it closes off to a localized version where it can actually understand everything. If you do the neurotic, you've never been to DC, you've never met Trump, so there's a lack of certainty there that can open up. But then the failure of the psychosis, which is small fascist states, is they inevitably become auto-cannibalistic because they cannot provide themselves. So the fail point of the psychosis is the auto-cannibalism. The fail point of the neurotic is the lack of certainty that then leads to dissonance that has to be closed down. And then we're basically stuck moving between those forever with drones. So I'll pass it to Daniel and Michael. Daniel.
It's an outrageously rich conversation. Like it's actually it's overwhelming. The there are a lot of gold here. I mean, maybe just to briefly, so Daniel, you can go help with the wedding. Like this this almost about to structure, and then just the seed from the beginning of the conversation that language uses us, or you're used by language. And so this aversion to implicating yourself by coming to speech about something, because when you do come to speech about it, you inevitably do implicate yourself in the eyes of the other. You become ethically other, and it's a terrible thing. You can understand the aversion to it, and then I guess it's just to like reflect and appreciate the space of speech that we're participating in at the moment, which is the background question that I have always in politics. And like I try and examine myself in terms of how much is it I'm avoiding a certain anxiety, but or how much is it does the abstract level conversation not actually do anything? So and then you think like, so what's the relational sites of relevance, and like when are we engaging philosophically, or when are we like all mutually being used by just this movement of language that never touches us as subjects? And how can you ever assure this kind of touching or skin in the game, or offering, or it's yeah, it's intense. The philosophy, religion, the catalyst of these events, and then the anxiety of, or the not wanting to use an event, which is the same question of how do I respond? Like how do I and there's something like I have no idea. Like if I can't like uh, I see someone murdered, and I just fall into like blah blah, blah, or then I scroll. It's absurd. Like if I can't like cry because it's just, and that kind of like it's a, I suppose there's something like a Like a prayer. I'm wondering what prayer means here. What is a prayerful response to that? What's a but yeah, let just put it down again and say it's overwhelming the conversation that's happened.
Well, you are a gentleman and 100% on what you said. And yes, what does it say about us? A lot. I'll give it to Michael here to close. And again, forgive me for having to go. On this idea of getting beyond the movement of language, beyond, which is ultimately the question for me, because it's the movement of signifiers of how to get beyond your map, how to get beyond your internally consistent system, because you must have an internally consistent system. And an idea of dealing with the problem of internally consistent systems, which is the problem of ideology, is to destroy ideology, deconstruct it. People have tried. You can't. You can't, because life has to be intelligible to people. So how do you get beyond? Encountering the person you hate. That's the only way. You have to encounter the language you don't want, because that creates the slippage. The only way to get beyond the movement of language is to force yourself to encounter the language you don't even want to be language. That is the language of that is the only way to hold the girdle point. And basically that's why everything will come down to the question of forgiveness. It always will. That is the end. If we can't deal with that, we are screwed, because that is the returning of the knowledge of good and evil. Forgiveness is the problem. It requires basically a Manhattan Project, and if we don't take it on, history will repeat no matter how much we learn about history, because ultimately history reflects what we do, not what we learn. And all we ultimately learn to do, if we don't learn how to face people we hate, is to convince ourselves we do face people we hate while drifting. And history becomes our judge by repeating and showing that we're no different, because only history can force us to see we're no different when we're so good at convincing ourselves that we are. Let me give it to Michael.
Ooh, yeah, this is good. Fuck, I don't know how to follow that, but I want to come back to what Javier was talking about with psychosis and memory, because I think that's so important. I I watched this. It was a clip of an interview done by the YouTuber Christian Baxter. He had on this woman. I think her name was Christine or Christina Trotter. I apologize if I got that name wrong, but she's I think she's a pastor or a co-pastor at an Orthodox church, and she was recounting the story of her her grandma had just passed, and she had gathered her family, all members, relatives of her family, and no, sorry, her grandma was passing, and she asked her, as you know, kind of this like official member of the church, to to if they could go to church. And she was like, well, grandma, it's Saturday, we church is tomorrow. And she's like, no, but I want you to do something churchy right now. So she was like kind of flustered and put on the spot, and she led them in song of all of these um hymns, Amazing Grace. And she was like, she was getting choked up as she was recounting the story, because she was like, every single person, whether they were Christian, what sect of Christianity they were, knew these songs by heart, like, and everyone was singing. And she was like, if we have this culture that kind of crusades against tradition and history, we're going to be left with songs that no one knows the words to in a generation or two. And she was like, say what you will about these songs or prayers or whatever, and maybe they don't, maybe they're not PC, or they don't, the person who wrote them was a rapist or a racist or whatever. But if you kill moments like that, you I mean, you literally are destroying family, like, moments that are like precious, that like live in people's minds, that evoke emotion like that, that tie people together across difference. And I think right now with how people are responding to the assassination and kind of the the dilution of the moment and just focusing on kind of ideology, like it's like read anything from history about moments like this that happen and societies that respond, with the eye for an eye kind of approach. And it's like you will see how that's obviously just not the right thing to do. I think in addition to becoming a psychotic society, I think we're also becoming a schizotypical society. I have a really good friend who he's kind of labeled himself as having a lot of those attributes and has taught me a ton about what the schizoid character structure looks like and um the wound of like the childhood wound of neglect and lack of love that manifests itself as social alienation, isolation, basically convincing oneself that the other is dangerous and can't be trusted and is not needed, is not necessary. I think we're also heading in that direction. So we got a nice cocktail of psychosis and schizoid and neuroticism all at the same time. Because as psychotic as we are, we also realize deep down how erosive that is. And so we have this like kind of dual extreme of psychosis and then neuroticism of wanting the other. But then because there's not a security of self and because that's like a desperate need for attention, that's where the codependency comes in. That's where like the kind of kind of just cleaving on to others that we see originates from. So yeah, we everything that has already been said in terms of the virtuous path forward. I won't repeat that, but that memory point is like super crucial in terms of realizing patterns that we're doomed to repeat if we don't take that into account, but also remembering like what it means to be truly human. And I think the tragic thing for a lot of people is that they don't have those memories. They don't have the family gathering that woman recounted. They never actually experienced that themselves. So in some sense, what they're being asked to recover is not something that they've actually experienced before, but maybe is like something pre-memory, something like in the guts of being human that like doesn't actually require like a a biographical encounter with that, but is like, I don't know, divinely given. But it's a very hard proposition for people to basically be asked to face the other when they've never shown that being modeled, or what attempts that has been modeled to them has led to disaster. So it's like placing a bike in front of someone and telling them to get on and ride it without being shown how to do that. So it's a very tricky issue. I think it's a lot more complicated than just being like, get out there, get out of your room and face the other. It's like, whoa, let's titrate that. But yeah, I'll give that back.
Fantastic. And I appreciate everyone being here, and I apologize for having to run. Absolutely what you said. This is why you would have, well, social capital, churches, institutes, lion clubs to train people. And if you just say, just go out there and do it, the system actually wants that, if you will, because you'll fail. And then that will seem to make it rational that you didn't go out there. And therefore now you're worse off than maybe had you not gone out at all. Because before you went out at all, you could still plausibly wonder if you need to. But after you go out and fail, then it will seem like you're right to never go out. And this has happened in Japan. And this is why I always have said, for me, this is why it's always been that Japan was where everything was going. It was always with Daniel Zaruba. What you see in Japan, because you see in Japan this complicated cocktail of various psychosis as well, like mixtures of all these mental issues going on, perversion mixed with the psychotic, mixed with the neurotic, this weird sort of neurotic structure that's simultaneous with people locked in their rooms in radical perversion, all kind of going together. I think Japan shows this because it westernized, it modernized without religion quickest. Its entire program was to modernize without religion. And so it's ahead of the game in many respects. And it's also, well, the most, you could argue, technological. I mean, they're doing Ghost in the Shell in the 80s, right? So Japan is important. I think also just a few things quickly, although, you know, because these people might fire me or something. I think we see perversion in leaders. I think leaders go to the perverse, and I don't have to bring up what I'm referencing. And that's been wide scale in all of history, because that's when you come to enjoy your lack. You come to enjoy the fact that you can't get what you want, actually. So you have to enjoy not getting it. And you also, I think there's an enjoyment that comes from doing that, which if discovered, you lose everything. And there's a thrill that actually comes from doing the most heinous of things in darkness. And also, if all the other leaders are doing it, creates a bond. And there is a force of necessity. Keep quiet. Actually, perversion creates necessity. You know, I think actually a lot of history, it's not just now, I think actually that goes through history, where perverse acts have been ways that leaders have bound together. I think what you're saying on singing is very important. It is interesting how you can remember a song that you haven't heard for 40 years. The loss of singing and the loss of memory go together. The loss of music. We listen to music, we don't make music. So devices is no different. Devices remember for us. We've outsourced memory to devices. Likewise, we've outsourced music to MP3s. I do think the skill of music and the skill of memory go together in mysterious ways. And if you don't have culture that sings together, that is evidence of a lack of cultural memory. And if you lose memory and you have small fascist states, you're screwed. Because the only way to basically get out is to remember something. There's nothing to remember. It's a major problem. And singing does have a way of bringing people together in unique ways. I've always, you know, one of the things with the loss of religion is actually the loss of reasons for people to sing together. Like it used to be, there'd be a weekly practice of, say, hymns. Obviously, Islam has done singing far better than Christians, and putting it as primary in the thinking, because when you lose music, you lose something big. And when you lose people sitting around after dinner making music, you lose something freaking big. And also the fact that John learned the guitar, even though, here's the other key. When everyone would sit around the table after dinner and make music, even though they were going to never be musicians, that was a testament that it's good to learn skills even if you don't get paid in it. It was a testament to the excess of the human being and the possibility of doing things as a good for their own sake, per se, as beautiful for their own sakes. If people aren't going to do that, you should only learn skills that are going to get you jobs. And you do. And guess what happens? If everyone around the table has skills in a job that only they attend, it's really hard to have something in common with even your own family, because you spend half the day in a world that they can't access and they know nothing about. And you have no cultural heritage, because you cannot have occupational heritage be communal. Occupational heritage is specialized. And so you struggle to communicate it in a world where we're not even trained how to speak to one another. So of course everyone's isolated. Even if they're living with one another, they're already mentally hakogormi like the Japanese. They're already never leaving their apartment. They're never leaving the space of their occupational expertise because they don't know how to get beyond it. And yes, a few more things. As another potential catalyst, I am going to be late. I am increasingly convinced that I am curious also with the economy going on right now. I'm just going to say some quick things that are probably other reasons why we're screwed. Is I think actually Wall Street is making money destroying the real economy, and it will continue to do that. I also think that businesses are becoming very profitable for AI that is yet to show how it's going to make money. They're getting ahead. Also, here's the critical damnation. Businesses are already firing people like crazy, knowing they're not going to need them in the future for AI. But a good Keynesian would say, hey, you're going to fire all these people knowing you don't need them for AI. And that's precisely why you won't get to the world where you have the AI, because the economy will crash before that. So if we get ahead of ourselves, like businesses seem to be doing, it could cause a major economic crisis, which would set all of this off. And I actually do think we're seeing that, because I think in most of history, The only way you pulled the economy forward was through interest rates. And that is how you could stay in a forever quasi boom, as Keynes put it, by having low interest rates to send a signal that the economy would be stronger. I would like to argue that that is actually happening with AI in the job market, and that has never occurred, and that could be truly catastrophic. Because if you have demand fall off a cliff real fast, then AI won't be able to pick up the slack because it won't be here yet to pick up the slack. And if it is, the companies funding it will run out of money because nobody has demand to fund it. So pulling ahead the AI future before it's ready could be the greatest economic mistake in history, but I can't prove it. It's just something I've been thinking a lot about. That could be another. I just wanted to throw that in. Also, this logic of an eye for an eye. Yes, history shows that that's a really bad logic, but no one said, hey man, an eye for an eye is bad, but what about like an animal eye? And what about a monster's eye? That's okay. That's different, right? None of us are guilty of an eye for an eye. We're guilty of removing, isn't it good to make Hitler blind? Isn't it good to make the enemy unable to see? This isn't an eye for an eye because I'm not giving them my eye. I'm going to stop them before they stick. Like, it's not, no one is a moral monster. No one is a moral monster. And that's why we have a tendency to become monstrous. And that's why if we don't encounter one another, if we don't force ourselves to the place where, because what did Sartre say? Hell is other people. Well, in the other way that I said earlier, that heaven for those with a single sin actually becomes hell. Actually encountering hell is how you can go to heaven because it becomes purgatory. It becomes purifying. And if hell is other people, you need other people for that purgifying fire so you get the sin out of you before you encounter real joy, real happiness, and it turns into your damnation because you weren't ready for it and therefore it destroys you. So we better deal with the hell that is other people precisely so that we can be fully human, because if we don't do that now, if we do not choose to do it, history will show that we failed. And I would like history to show a different story. Thank you all.